Good evening. Welcome to our adult Bible study. We are beginning a study of the book of Daniel. Daniel, you'll find in the prophets, the major prophets in the Old Testament. We will be looking at this book over the next few weeks. Main characters, if you will, in this book is, of course, Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar II, as he is appropriately titled. We will be looking at these two characters. Other characters in this book, of course, is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew children. We'll be looking at these individuals. This book was written during the Babylonian captivity, while the children of Israel were in exile in the land of Babylon. This book was written. It's divided into three sections. Part one is actually chapter one, and this is the personal history of Daniel. Part two would be chapters 2 through 7, and this is the prophetic plan for the Gentiles. This was written in the language of the Chaldeans. This is an interesting that Daniel would have two languages, the Chaldean language as well as Hebrew. So the first part of this is a prophecy directed to the Gentiles, and therefore he wrote it in the language of the Gentiles of his day, the world power, Babylon, the Great, if you will. Then the part 3 is chapters 8 through 12. And this is the prophetic plan for Israel. And this was actually written in Hebrew. So this book was written by Daniel to two groups of people, and the other to his people, Israel, and he wrote it in their language where they could understand. Nebuchadnezzar, too, as he is recorded in history, was the greatest king of ancient Babylon during the period of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And he succeeded his founder, its father, Nabopolassar. I probably did not pronounce that correctly, but at any rate, Nebuchadnezzar achieved the throne, and he was a great builder. He built the city of Babylon and made it great. He was a conqueror. He conquered many nations around him, and at the height of his power, he was the ruler of the world, the known world of his day. They had subdued all lands around them, and he became very, very, very powerful. That's going to play out in this book as we see Daniel address that. But Nebuchadnezzar was a tool, if you will, that God used to subject the children of Israel to his punishment. Because of disobedience, the children of Israel were going to be destroyed. The Bible, in several prophets, predicts the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem. Judah was the southern tribe. The Assyrians had already destroyed the northern 10 tribes, the nation of Israel. Judah was left, Judah and Benjamin, and Babylon was used to destroy them. In the first invasion under King Jehoiakim, these are the last three kings of Israel before the Babylonian captivity. Jehoiakim, in 606 BC, was defeated with an invasion from Babylon. Daniel was carried away as a prisoner at this time, probably around the age of 12. So the young man Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were carried away prisoner to Babylon after this first invasion under King Jehoiakim. Now, there was a second invasion from Babylon under King Jehoiachin in 598 BC. Jehoiachin and Ezekiel the prophet were carried away captive as a result of this particular invasion. And then the third and final invasion was under King Zedekiah, the last king of the nation of Judah before the Babylonian captivity. And this was around 588, 586 BC. This invasion, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem completely, carried away everything in the temple, and he also carried away the king Zedekiah at that particular point in time. So everything was complete. Jerusalem absolutely destroyed, and many of its young, learned princes and people were carried prisoner to Babylon. Daniel survived the 70-year Babylonian captivity and was probably too old to return with the remnant to Jerusalem, because after 70 years of captivity in Babylon, the prophets had prophesied that the children of Israel, the remnant, would return to Jerusalem, rebuild the city, and rebuild the temple, and that they did. But Daniel was probably alive during that period of time, but could not make the trip because of his advanced age. Daniel lived to be in his 80s. It's in his later life that he wrote the prophetic parts of his book. So, as we dig into this, know that Daniel grew up in Babylon. He grew up as a courtier, which means he lived in the palace or around the palace with the king. He was present over the magicians at one point in time, uh, taught in the Chaldean way, and became a very influential person in Babylon over a period of time. And of course, the Daniel in the Lion's Den, the story that is the main part of this book, is a demonstration of the power of God and God's ability to take care of his children and his willingness to do so. So, as we dig into this, we want to appreciate Daniel, the prophet, grown up in a foreign land, yet stayed true to his history and stayed true to his God that he knew was all powerful, even though he had been deposed and placed in a foreign land. So we need to understand that, and we need to get it within our heads. Books like Daniel tell us that it's important for us to maintain our Christianity no matter what circumstance we find ourselves in. We live in uncertain days, and we've preached several sermons recently to this end as we have been studying the prophets, the major and minor prophets, and their messages to the children of Israel over the period of time that they preached. God tried time and time and time again to get the attention of Israel, to get the attention of his people, that he required their obedience. He required their loyalty. And that message just did not sink in with the children of Israel. I fear that we're living in a time that that message is not sinking in with the church. God needs us to be loyal to him. God needs us to be loyal to our faith. And if that means that I have to pull apart from the world, then that's what I need to do. I need to pull apart from the world and be separate. Whatever I need to do to maintain my Christianity, I have to do that. And I want us to really, really think that through in light of current events in the world and the situation that we see going on. Has, during this COVID quarantine, your faith dwindled? Has your fire gone out? Do you feel as passionate about God, even though we're unable to gather in God's house? Are you still studying? Are you still growing? Are you still doing the things you need to do to be a Christian? And I encourage us, and I will encourage us for the rest of my ministry to be independent Christians, having the ability to grow on our own. Now, we need each other. We need persons like myself to prod us and to encourage us and to coach us. I don't want to stop fellowshipping together. The Bible is very clear in Hebrews not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. But there may be a time when by law or by fear of persecution that we may have to seek other ways to communicate with one another. During those times, how are you going to grow as a Christian? How are you going to develop? Daniel, I see this picture. Daniel with the lions just looking at him. They didn't eat him, but they were there, ready to pounce at a moment's notice. I feel like we're living in a world where Satan is there, ready to pounce at any moment in time. We need to be ready. We need to be prayed up, studied up, our feet on the solid rock of Jesus Christ, prepared to take on whatever challenge comes to us. Now, Daniel, as a young boy, had no choice. He was taken to Babylon as a prisoner. That is a choice he did not make. But the choice he did make, we'll look at in verse 8. He chose to stay on fire for God. He chose to maintain his Christian walk. He chose God over the Babylonian gods and the comforts of the palace. Daniel was at positions of authority throughout his life, yet he never compromised his Christian principles. He never compromised his relationship with God. And even when laws were passed that would prevent him from doing what he was supposed to do to serve God, he did it anyway. So I want us to understand that it is important to serve God no matter what. And we have got to serve God. We have got to be obedient to him and do the things that he would have us to do. So in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God." Now I want you to notice something here. He went into the temple, and he took some of the things out of the temple and carried it to his God. Well, how did he know those things were in the house of God? How did he know what was in there? Well, if you remember back to Hezekiah, one of Hezekiah's faults was he allowed the messengers from Babylon to tour his palace and the house of God. So the scouts had already determined what was in the house of God and how beautiful and immaculate it was. And so Nebuchadnezzar, after his first invasion, helped himself to some of the things that were in the temple. In verse 3, "And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans." Now I want you to notice that Babylon stole the children. They stole the children of the princes and of the kings and of the skillful people. They took those children because those children had knowledge. They had experience. They had abilities. It's no different than the Chinese trying to garner information by sending their children to learn here in the United States, and other countries doing the same thing. Even North Korea's leader right now was trained in the United States, received a degree in the United States. So these people desire knowledge from our country, and they come over here and they learn, and then they go back to their country and they carry that information. Well, Nebuchadnezzar knew that if he gathered up all of these children and taught them in his way of thinking, he would increase the knowledge within his own country, the skill level of his people, and he would be able to be a more powerful king. So as he carried all of these children to Babylon, they were also taught in the tongue of the Chaldeans. They were taught the language of the land, and they were taught all the things that Babylon could teach them. So they brought the knowledge they already had from their home country, and then they picked up the knowledge of the new country, Babylon, and then they were allowed to stay in the court and work for the king to make the king a more powerful king and more knowledgeable in all things. Well, the children of Israel, Daniel and his friends, were brought under this pretense. So they were brought young, probably under the age of 12 or around the age of 12. And you say, well, a 12-year-old is not going to be skillful in knowledge. A 12-year-old is not going to be learned in the sciences and all of these things. How can a 12-year-old be able to do all of these things? Well, remember, Jesus at age 12 was in the temple with the doctors of the law in the temple, and they were amazed at his knowledge. They were amazed at his ability. I look at my own son, who's 10 years old. I'm amazed sometimes at his knowledge. I'm amazed at the abilities that he has. One of Israel's greatest kings, Josiah, became king at 8 years old and was one of the greatest kings that Israel had. So I want you to understand these children, aged 12 ish, were a great asset to Babylon. If they could indoctrinate them in the tongue of the Chaldeans and the ways of the Babylonians and the gods of the Babylonians, they could create a society that was learned and would be better able to function as a nation. So this was a real advantage to Nebuchadnezzar, and it helped him to become very powerful. So he gathered up all the children, Daniel being one of them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being the others. And we're going to look at their real names here in just a second. But he carried all these people to Babylon with the intent of indoctrinating them and helping them to become good Babylonian citizens and an asset to him, the king. In verse 5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank. So nourishing them 3 years. I want you to notice 3 years. He was going to put them there in Babylon for 3 years of training, and then he was going to reassess them. At the end thereof, they might stand before the king. To stand before the king meant the king would take a look at them. He would look at their physical appearance and determine the ones he wanted to stand in his court, as well as he would look at their intellectual appearance. What did they know? What were their skills? What were their abilities? So he's going to do two things. He's going to look at them for their outward appearance, and then he's going to look at what they know, and he's going to determine if they can stand in the court with him and assist in the kingdom. So by age 15, 16, 17, they're going to be in the court assisting him in making decisions and advisors and so forth. Those that excel in their studies and those that come up through the ranks will be used by the king to a great degree. Now, among these were the children of Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, we don't usually know them as Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah because their names change once they get to Babylon. But it's funny, we know Daniel by his Hebrew name, and we know Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah by their Babylonian name. It's funny how our trends over the years in Sunday school have done that. Daniel, we remember by his Hebrew name, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah by their Babylonian name. Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar. So it's interesting. We don't remember Belteshazzar. We remember Daniel. But Belteshazzar was his Babylonian name. And to Hananiah, Shadrach, and Mishael of wait, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. And to Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. So we know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three Hebrew children. So it's just interesting. I thought I would point that out as we go through, that we remember the Babylonian names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but we remember the Hebrew name of Daniel. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. That was the main topic of our sermon this past Sunday, as that passage just jumps off the page to me. He purposed in his heart And I want you to understand, if you didn't watch the sermon Sunday, go back and watch it as we preached on this topic on Sunday, because you and I must purpose in our heart that we're not going to defile ourselves with a portion of the king's meat. That's resisting the devil. The Bible says if you will resist the devil, he will flee from you. It's when we give place to the devil that we are consumed and destroyed by him. So if you didn't hear the sermon Sunday, go back on Facebook and look it up and watch the sermon for Sunday, because we go in depth on this. He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. But I want you to understand, Daniel, going into Babylon as a 12-year-old boy, said, I'm not going to defile myself. So for this 3-year period of time, Daniel is not going to eat of the king's meat. In other words, maybe it wasn't wrong to eat the king's meat. Maybe it wasn't wrong to eat the fine things that he was provided. But Daniel did not want to give in to his flesh. He did not want to accept the lifestyle of the Babylonians. He wanted to maintain his Hebrew heritage. He wanted to maintain his Christian. We call it Christian now. It wasn't Christian then. But he wanted to maintain his lifestyle that he knew was godly. He did not want to accept the lifestyle of the Babylonians, even though he was trained in the Babylonian way. He did not allow himself to give in to Babylon. You and I must do the same thing. We cannot allow ourselves to give in to the world around us. That's why the Bible says, come you out from among them and be ye separate. God wants us to separate ourselves from the evil that is in this world. Now, he doesn't want us to move off to an island and isolate ourselves. He doesn't say isolate. He says separate. You and I must choose in our mind, purpose in our heart, that we will not defile ourselves with the culture that is around us. Even if that culture, even if something's okay to do, it may not be what's best for us as a Christian, because it may pull us away from God. When you eat a bag of chips, you eat that first chip and you want another one and another one and another one and another one. Well, if you don't ever eat that first chip, then you don't really desire the whole bag of chips. But once you eat that chip, you're going to eat all of them. Well, maybe 1 or 2 chips would fit into your diet and would be okay, but the whole bag is too much. So if we're prone to do things and we know we have weaknesses, we need to try to avoid the ways in which we would be deceived by those weaknesses or lured in by Satan to participate in those weaknesses. Uncle Jerry used to always say, the time to avoid eating a cookie is before you take the lid off the cookie jar. Verse 9, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Now I want you to understand this. Daniel became very respected by the person over him. Now, how could that possibly happen if Daniel was bitter, depressed, and sad because of his new environment? That would not have happened. Daniel accepted the place where God had placed him and continued to be a good person. And folks, I encourage you, as we see the end approaching, Christians are going to have to become reacquainted with this concept. We are going to have to be prepared to be content in whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, and not allow our circumstance to steal our Christianity. I will say that over and over and over again. That is a thought that has been so placed on my heart. I hear Christians make very bold statements, and I hear Christians make very strong demands on others. I'm telling you, folks, the Bible says that except for the very elect's sake, time will be shortened. Except for the very devout Christians that are about to stumble, God will shorten time. So that means those that are on the weak end of being Christians will be devoured, totally consumed by Satan. I don't want to be one of those devoured by Satan. So we've got to begin to understand these biblical teachings. these prophets that went through hard times, how did they respond? What was their attitudes? What was their behavior? Because, folks, if we cannot embrace those attitudes and those behaviors, we're going to be destroyed. I promise, we're going to be destroyed. The book of Revelations is very clear. Those that live by the sword will die by the sword. Violence is not going to get us through the tribulation period. I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to wall yourself in a safe room with a M16 rifle and defend yourself from Satan and from the wrath of God. It's just not going to happen. So I want you to understand that. Verse 10, and the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endangered my head to the king. Now, this eunuch that Daniel had gained favor with really appeals to Daniel. And he says, Daniel, listen, I know you're a good kid. I appreciate you. I see that you are advanced above others of your own race. I see that you're talented. I want to adhere to what you're saying, but I fear for my own head. The king would not be happy if in 3 years Daniel showed up and looked malnourished. Okay, so that's what this guy's saying. I don't want you to look malnourished, Daniel. I could lose my head if things do not go well, and the king understands what has happened. So then said Daniel to Melzar. Melzar is this eunuch, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days. Now look at what Daniel asks. Daniel says, hey, give us 10 days. In 10 days, you should know whether or not our countenance is changing. You feed us for 10 days. Just give us pulse. Pulse was vegetables or beans to eat and water to drink. So water and vegetables is all that Daniel asked for, water and vegetables. He didn't want to eat of the king's meat, and he didn't want to drink the king's wine. He wanted water and vegetables to eat. And so that's what the guy did. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, look here, Daniel said it, as thou seest, deal with thy servants. In other words, you take a look at us. If in 10 days we look like we're malnourished and losing weight, and our countenance is not good, then you deal with us as seems proper to you. I don't want you to get in trouble. You do what you see, but we're going to trust God that just eating vegetables and water will make us in a better place with God. So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. All right, so what happened? At the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat of the king's portion. Now, folks, this is the classic example of what God will do if we'll trust him. Daniel didn't want to defile himself. He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. As a result, he sought the leadership, got approval, and was able to separate himself from the king's meat, basically the ideology of Babylon. And as a result, he appeared better physically than those around him. I often see pictures of individuals that have been involved in taking drugs and participating in drugs and these types of things, and their countenance is different. Their appearance is different, and it's easily seen. That's sad. That's very sad. Folks, if we'll trust God and do the things that God would have us to do, we will be and we will stand out from those that we are around. Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood out from the others. They appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the others. God honored them. God will honor us. Now, does that mean I'll never be sick? Does that mean I'll never hurt myself? Does that mean I'll never have a bruise or a problem. No, that's not what God said. Here, the boys abstained from the king's meat and wine, and God honored them. That's what this is saying. If I will honor God in my life and in my actions, God will honor me. I will stand out from others. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse, or vegetables, and water. As for these four children, God gave them knowledge. Now look at what God did. You know, Solomon, the greatest king in Israel, he didn't pray for wealth and riches and power. He prayed for wisdom to rightly judge the people. Daniel and them didn't pray to be released from Babylon. They didn't pray return to Jerusalem. They asked that they purposed in their hearts to serve God wherever they were. There in Babylon, and they asked for the ability not to defile their bodies, and they were granted that. They appeared fairer than the others, and then God rewarded them. God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. This is going to play out later. Joseph, earlier in Egypt, had the ability to interpret dreams. Daniel is another dream interpreter. He's going to be able to reveal dreams and great things as we go through this chapter. But God granted him that ability. 12 years old, taken to a foreign land, chooses to serve God above the gods of the land that he was taken to, set himself apart, and God honored him. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them. I want you to understand, communed. He talked to them. He looked at them. Okay? He listened to their conversation and their knowledge. And among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. These three boys chose to separate themselves and not be defiled in the land in which they were taken prisoner. Now, I want you to understand, I don't know what happened to their parents, but I would bet their parents were killed. And I would bet they saw their parents killed. Yet they continued to serve God. I tell my kids all the time, if somebody's got a gun to my head and they're going to kill me if I don't deny Christ, I'm hoping that I have the strength to hold on to my faith and not deny Christ. And I've told my children, if they shoot me, in your view, I want you to continue to hold on to God, because I will see you in heaven. So I want you to understand these four boys, I don't know what they had gone through in Jerusalem. I don't know what they saw. They were age 12. I'm sure they saw the horror of the destruction of Jerusalem. Yet they went to the court of the king and excelled and were seen as above all the others. I really want us to grasp that. That is so important. Can you be taken prisoner, carried to a foreign land, and still be a Christian? And still do what is right by your captors? Folks, we're very prideful in this country. We've never had to answer to anyone else but ourselves. And I pray that we can survive this kind of treatment and rise above the others, just like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding, verse 20, that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better. 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. I want you to understand, between the ages of 12 and 16, these boys, by the power of God, became smarter than anybody else in the kingdom of Babylon. That's amazing, and that's what God can do. Verse 21, and Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Daniel continued until he was in his 80s. Okay? I want you to understand that. God gave this man a great ability, and he survived several kings, not just Nebuchadnezzar. He survived several kings and remained in the court throughout his lifetime. So I want you to understand the prophet Daniel was taken prisoner at age 12, lived his entire life in exile in a foreign land, and was a great prophet of God. Can you do that? Folks, we got to be thinking in those terms, and we've got to be moving in that direction. Hope you all have a great rest of the week.